What is happening, guys? Cowboy here, and in this video I really wanted to take some time and do more of a deep dive into some of the mechanical changes that we're seeing in Armored Core 6. Reading through the comments on the recent video and looking at some of the discussions on the Armored Core subreddit, there's obviously a lot of discussion about new mechanics, stuff like being able to heal, change your parts mid-mission, a lot of discussions surrounding the new lock-on mechanic, a little bit about assembly, and so I really just want to deep dive into all of these mechanics because while I'm only able to show the B-roll footage that was already provided, and that's what's going to be looping in the background, we obviously saw a little bit more than this, and we saw it with the HUD on. We got to see various levels on meters like energy and whatnot moving. We got to see how fast the heal was, and so what I really wanted to do was just a deep dive video that goes more in depth into those mechanics for you. Now the first thing I want to talk about is the lock-on mechanic. I think this has been probably one of the most hotly debated things I've seen people discussing on the subreddit. At least a lot of people are going back and forth on whether the lock-on is good or bad, and how it's going to change the gameplay. So to recap past Armored Core games, the basic gist would be that we had a reticle in the middle of our screen, and the size of this reticle was determined by the FCS that we had on. And as long as we maintained a target within that reticle, we were considered locked on. So the basic gist is, as you're flying all over the place, you had to keep your enemy centered on your screen to maintain lock-on. You had to keep them in that reticle for a certain amount of time, and that would dictate whether you were firing your guns or your missiles or whatever the case is. Now, even then, just because something was locked on, didn't mean anything was going to be a guaranteed hit. We still had CIWS to counter missiles. We had jammers, which could just forcefully drop a lock-on from an enemy. We had people that were just manually dodging. And another big thing is, with that system, melee was always kind of a shit show. Trying to go in and land a melee hit, or even trying to go in and boost kick, for the most part, it was almost closer to a joust. You were centering the enemy in your frame, rushing right at them, and if it hit, great. If it connected, great. But a lot of times, you would literally see ACs just flying past each other, swinging swords, with nobody hitting anything. So now we come up to AC6, where we do have a hard lock-on. And the thing is, personally, I do think it's going to make the game better. I think it's going to be a lot cleaner in terms of us staying on the target and just being able to flow into that melee combat, into the kick. But at the same time, I don't think it's just going to be this free-for-all that a lot of people think a lock-on is going to give them. And there's a couple reasons for this. The first is with the FCS itself. So if we actually look at the information for the FCS when they're in assembly, there are 3 different stats listed: melee assist, mid-range assist, and ranged assist. Now, from the brief information that was on that one, it looks like they were using a FCS that was more of a mid-range assist that was good with missiles. But my guess would be that there's these 3 different stats, one for long range, one for mid, and one for melee. I would assume that these are going to impact either your ability to stay locked on to a target within that particular range, or they're also probably going to impact the speed of lock-on in that particular range. On top of that, I want to discuss how this would play into PvP, because the thing is, if we just had a hard lock-on and we're able to just lock onto a target and see everywhere they're running and where they're going, just to play devil's advocate, let me pull Souls in for a second. So if you're fighting somebody in Souls and they're literally running in circles around you, for the most part your camera is kind of like following and then looping back, following and then looping back, and you're able to keep track of them. But Souls moves at a much, much slower pace than Armored Core. The footage that they gave us in this B-roll, obviously they're moving a little slower and methodical, and they're not going, crazy turbo mode all over the place, because they're really just trying to focus on showing the gameplay. I mean, let's be honest. Have y'all ever seen a gameplay preview from devs where someone was going full turbo mode? I haven't. That's only the stuff we get to see when players get their hands on the game. And the point I'm making by this is, if 2 players were fighting and the hard lock-on was just maintained perpetually, what's to stop a player that's in a ultralight AC from just running literal circles around somebody and causing their camera to basically seizure out? Or on the flip side, what's to stop somebody from a tank tread AC from basically just assault boosting right up to somebody and then just holding down the triggers on 2 autocannons and absolutely melting them because they maintain this perpetual lock-on? When you think about those 2 separate extremes, the answer is simple. It doesn't make sense. And because of that, I have a very strong feeling that the hard lock-on isn't going to be nearly as hard as we are being led to believe from the PvE combat. I think there's still going to have to be some level of camera manipulation by the player. I think that if somebody is, boosting right behind you and popping a 180, I think you're going to have to do a similar maneuver yourself. You're going to have to turn around to regain that lock-on. I don't think the camera's just going to be like, they're behind you, and instantly flip around. Because at that point, there really wouldn't be all that much advantage to a faster AC at all. You would just go for the heaviest, most sturdy AC you could with the most bullets. So, given this is something that we're only going to get clarity on when we get hands-on or when the developers clarify in an interview, I have a feeling that the new FCS system, the hard lock, isn't going to be as hard as some people are making it out to be. Now, moving on from there, I wanted to discuss the death and the healing mechanic, because a lot of people seem to be concerned about that. And I also think this ties into the new level design that we're seeing. So this one level we're seeing, obviously it's a very large area. You have freedom of approach in how you go about it. You start with an external area, you make your way into an internal area, which is going to limit your mobility a little bit, and then eventually we make our way up to a boss. Now, just based on the limited footage that we received, I would assume this is basically a main mission. And one of the other pieces of evidence for this is in the actual footage we received, there's an NPC that's essentially talking shit to you the whole time while you're going through. It's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. This is what I'd expect from a Raven. It's that person that's on your comms taunting you as you make your way through the level. That's very much main mission 101 type stuff. But I don't think that means this is all we're going to see. I would assume we're also going to see, because just looking at previous ACs, I would assume we'll still have shorter side missions. We might have something where we're going back to the same level that we just did, but it's something simple. Like, you need to take out 20 targets that are held up in an area. And it might not be that simple, but, I would imagine portions of the levels are reused for submissions, almost similar to how Neo does it. Those of you that have played the Neo franchise, you would go through an entire huge level, and then there would be a submission that looked at kind of the back third of the level, and you would go through it backwards to accomplish an objective or something like that. I would bet we have side missions like that. I would also bet we still have duel-oriented side missions, where it's just going to be you're going in and fighting a singular armor core or a double armor core, and it's essentially just a battle to the death. So I think a lot of what we're seeing is just showing the scale of a main mission, and then we're going to see those side missions. Now, looping back to the original point of this discussion, the death penalty and the healing, from the perspective of main missions, and seeing that they want to give us more a sense of progression and focus, kind of progressing through an actual level, I think the healing makes sense in that context. If we look at the more traditional missions for Armored Core, they were usually almost all objective based. You had go in, take out these anti-air cannons. After that, defend the encroaching ACs that are coming up on your position. Get to the helicopter and protect that during extraction. So you had multiple different objectives that you had to do, but those objectives were all on just a large, more open-scaled map. Or, well, I guess in some cases, in 3, some of the maps were a good bit smaller, kind of similar to what we're seeing with the footage here. But the thing is, I feel like none of those missions ever really gave me the vibe of progressing through a level. It was more a, I'm going to find the fastest route from A to B. And I think one of the best examples of this, so there's a mission I remember in Verdict Day where you essentially start off at the end of like a long pier, and there are a bunch of cannons that are on the pier that are kind of shooting at you. And you need to get past those cannons and destroy a certain amount of the defense. And then there are, I believe, like 2 ACs that come down that you got to take out. And obviously trying to go straight at them just never worked. So one of the things that most people did, what I did at least, is like right at the start of the battle, you would boost all the way over to the left, which would make a lot of the cannons kind of miss you. And then you were just cruising straight in on this little highway thing as fast as possible, while a lot of the shots were falling and hitting the highway and avoiding you. And then you were at the back of the base, and you were like, all right, popping this cannon off, popping this cannon off, popping this cannon off. Enemies came out. Let me kill those 2. Boom. I completed the mission with almost no damage and the minimal amount of ammo spent. And I think they're trying to get away from that. I think they want you to actually feel a sense of progression, like you're going to fight through specific zones of this area. And because of that, since they're trying to force you through zones, like, we want you to go through zone A, now we want you to move into zone B, now you're going to make your way up to a boss. In that context, I think the heal does make more sense. I also think, a lot of people, you can't see the heal in the demo, but for clarification's sake, the heal is instantaneous. This isn't like an Estus type thing where like your mech has to chill for a second and a little drone comes out and repairs you. Like, no, you press a button, just boom, you have like a flash of green, your health goes immediately back up. It's like a half a second. There's no animation, there's no nothing. So it is a very instantaneous heal. But like I said, in the context of going through these missions, I think that makes sense. Now, the other part of the discussion is, how are death mechanics and punishment going to work now? We see, in one of the big things now is looking at past Armored Core games, when you died, you usually just restarted the mission. There was no, like, we're part way through the mission, let me suddenly change what Armored Core I'm going to use, or let me just, I'm running out of ammo too fast, let me slap a Gatling gun on instead of a battle rifle. You went in with what you thought you needed, and if you didn't get through the mission, tough shit. You already spent the resources. So, obviously those mechanics are casualizing the experience a little bit. They're making it appeal to a larger demographic, one that's not as hardcore about mission prep and whatnot. But going back to the level design philosophy, I think in the context of you progressing through a level, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, they haven't clarified yet, but I would assume that every time you die, you probably lose a little bit of your mission score. The basic idea behind Armored Core is your score at the end of the mission was determined by a bunch of things, but two of the biggest ones, at least, were your costs. Now, like your repair costs to fix yourself back up, the costs based on how much ammo you spent. Those two things had a huge impact on the overall score for the mission, and as such, how much reward money you received. I would be very surprised if those aren't still in the game. Even though we don't see that in the footage, it just wouldn't make sense to remove something like that, because, otherwise, are we just, giving rewards after missions or something? Like, no, I would assume there's still money in the garage and buying parts and whatnot. Now, my question is going to be, how does swapping out your AC, or how does using the assembly impact that? Because a big thing would be, if I know that there's going to be a boss at the end, essentially I would go through a mission with a tank that has like a laser cannon and then a Gatling gun, or an auto cannon, shred everything I see, get up to the boss, I die once, and then I'm like, alright, let's pull out my ultimate weapon AC, get back into the boss room, charge up the laser, pop this dude, one-shot him, and then be like, great, only one death, minus 50,000 credits out of a 500,000 credit bonus. But if I'm able to change my Armored Core out, I mean, God, that gives you an unrivaled level of mission flexibility. So I feel like there has to be some type of negative to that. Like, when you're changing your AC out, there's like a redeployment cost maybe. Or if you're doing assembly mid-mission, there's like a garage cost or something like that. Because otherwise, I mean, I like the idea. It sounds cool, but at the same time, it would take away a huge part of the challenge. Absolutely. So I feel like those are going to have to tie into the punishment in some perspective. Whether that's just increased costs and a higher monetary hit, that's just something we'll have to find out later. The last thing I really want to discuss is focused around the assembly. Now, assembly does seem like it's been greatly simplified. Looking at the weapons, we can see there are two main stats across the various weapons. We have attack power as well as impact. So the impact, obviously, that's how much we're going to build up the stagger bar, and then the attack power, which is how much raw damage we're going to use. Which, briefly, on the note of the stagger bar, I know you can't really see it all that well in the B footage, but the basic idea behind the stagger bar is when it fills up, the enemy is just straight stunned. There's a moment where they aren't able to move, they're completely vulnerable to you. It's not like a death blow in Sekiro, where it's like, boom, they're staggered, they're dead. But it does give you a significant window to punch some damage through, which... This is going to sound a little crazy, but if you've played the Final Fantasy 16 demo, it's not unlike that, where you get the stagger and the enemy is suddenly down and you just have a window to do damage to them. It's actually very similar to that. Moving on from there, the defensive stats, it seems that you just have, your AP, and then you have just a straight up defensive stat now, in particular defensive performance. Now, our AP was like our armor points, basically just our health, if you will. I don't know if defensive performance is just going to be a flat out defensive stat across the board, but from going through and looking at the different weapons and the different armor types, I didn't see anything that expanded that out to suggest there being, stuff like thermal, chemical, and kinetic. I didn't see anything that suggested, something was going to be better against energy weapons versus better against battle rifles or whatever the case is. It does seem like things have been squished. Things have been simplified a lot. And that's probably one of the only real concerns that I think I had looking at it. And mainly because from the perspective of building your AC, I just hope that there's enough difference between like your attack power and impacted rounds that players want to use a diversity of weapons, and there doesn't just end up becoming, meta ACs that everyone wants to use because there's clearly a best assault rifle and there's clearly a best sniper rifle and stuff like that. One thing that I did notice that was interesting, though, is if you look at these little squares, you'll notice they change as we're swapping out parts. And so I think there is an emphasis now on them wanting you to basically pull out different weapon types, like saying like, hey, this is going to be a shield, a gun, and a fast reload or whatever, and really emphasizing the player on utilizing all 4 weapons in their disposal. Now, one thing we don't know anything about yet are fixed weapons. For those unfamiliar, there are weapons that typically you'd only really run these on a tank-style AC because they were very large weapons. They were very heavy, stuff like autocannons, sniper cannons. Other ACs that tried to use them, like quadrupeds or whatnot, you would basically go into a firing stance where you weren't really able to move while using them, but tanks could. Hence, they primarily ended up getting used with tanks. But these were usually super heavy weapons that couldn't just be swapped out. So the question is, now that it's considered shoulders and not like left weapon number 2, and I'm not rotating my arm anymore, are ACs that use fixed weapons also going to be able to have double shoulder weapons that they can pull in simultaneously? Because if so, the idea of having a tank with double autocannons and double missile launchers, I'm going to be honest, that sounds like a hell of a lot of firepower, and personally it's something that I'm all about. Either way though, that is going to wrap up our discussion for now. A lot of the stuff that I talked about in this video, I've actually asked Bandai if I can get clarification. I didn't really get a chance to interview the folks since I didn't fly out to LA, obviously, but hopefully they'll shoot an email over and I'll hear back and, be able to do a follow-up video on this. Actually come in with some discrete, clarified info from the development team. That would be super cool. But this is all stuff that I think not only am I curious about, but a lot of people in the community are right now. There's a lot of different things going on in this game that have changed, and personally, I think a lot of it is going to be for the better. I think the final product is going to be phenomenal, and more than anything, I'm really just excited for the fact that I'll be able to play Armored Core again without emulating it or dragging my 360 out of a closet. Just the fact that I'll be able to play Armored Core on Steam, on my Steam Deck, anytime I want, that alone is a victory, in my opinion. So if I do hear back from Bandai and I get clarification on things like exactly what the death punishments are going to be and more clarification on lock-on and whatnot, I will 100% make a follow-up video on that content talking about it. If I don't, well, the good thing is I would bet that we're probably going to get a network test or something along those lines in July, just because knowing Bandai and their track record with FromSoft, they pretty much always do network tests for games like this before they come out, and I would certainly think FromSoft would want to test the online connectivity before just throwing players in and finding out it's a laggy mess. So either way, we are going to wrap things up here for now. Appreciate y'all coming by. Let me know what you think. There's obviously a lot of mechanics that are changing, but overall, I think we're in for a hell of an experience. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch y'all next time.